The pain had no edges anymore. It had started that way, sharp, distinct, manageable, 3 hours ago when the storm had driven Morrigan off the coast road and into the old lighthouse keeper's cottage. Now it had expanded until it was everything. The walls, the air, the sound of rain hammering the tin roof like something furious trying to get inside. She gripped the leg of the overturned cot and breathed through it. In, out, in, out. The cottage smelled like salt and rotting rope and the particular dusty sweetness of a space no human had visited in years. A family of seabirds had nested in one corner, and the detritus of their occupation, feathers, dried kelp, the bleached skeleton of a small fish, was scattered across the warped plank floor. A single candle burned on the windowsill. Morrigan had found it in a tin box under a loose board, along with a book of matches and a length of fraying rope she had already decided she might need. The contraction passed. She breathed. She was 31 weeks by her count, maybe 32. She had stopped marking the days precisely 2 weeks ago, when the Velthorn Pack's southern enforcers had stopped following her, and she'd understood that no one was coming to bring her back. No one was coming for anything. She had been erased so efficiently from the Pack's records, her desk reassigned, her quarters allocated to a newly mated pair, her name struck from every roster, that it was as though she had never existed at all. She was a records clerk who had spent 9 years maintaining perfect archives. It was darkly appropriate that they had deleted her with the same efficiency she had used to document everyone else. The next contraction hit harder, much harder. Morrigan bit down on the inside of her cheek until she tasted blood and bore it. She had read every file on Pack births that had ever crossed her desk. She had nearly perfect recall, a fact that had made her useful and overlooked in equal measure. She knew the stages. She knew what was coming. She also knew she was going to die in this cottage if she bled too much too fast, and the nearest Pack territory was 8 miles of cliff road in a hurricane. The baby came 40 minutes later. Morrigan would not remember the actual birth clearly. What she would remember was the cold, the way it poured through the broken window shutter and hit her exposed skin like open water, and the silence between the last push and the first cry, which lasted exactly long enough for her to believe the worst, and then the sound that broke it, thin and furious and unmistakably alive. A girl. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her. The umbilical cord was still attached, pulsing, and Morrigan used the rope from the tin box to tie it off, and her own teeth to sever it, tasting salt and copper and something else she couldn't name, something bright and strange that made the dim, suppressed flicker inside her chest stir in a way it hadn't since she was 17, and High Alpha Osram had laid both hands flat on her sternum and told her to be still. She stripped off her coat and wrapped the baby in it. The cold hit her bare skin like a verdict. She didn't care. The baby was crying, really crying now, a sound that filled every corner of the cottage, and Morrigan pulled her daughter against her chest, skin to skin, and curled around her on the floor. The candle guttered. The storm screamed against the roof. She was bleeding. She could feel it, steady and warm against her thighs, more than it should have been. The warped floorboards beneath her were turning dark and wet. She had maybe an hour. She pressed her lips to the top of her daughter's head. The smell of her, bread dough and sea air, and something entirely new, something that was both alien and the most familiar thing she had ever encountered. And she made herself a simple promise. Her daughter would not die in this cottage. Whatever Morrigan had left to spend, her daughter would live. The wolf found the blood at the base of the lighthouse road. He had been running the northern cliff boundaries alone, which was unusual for an alpha king, and which his beta Sully had spent most of the afternoon arguing against in the particular loud, persistent way that Sully argued about everything. Radek had ended the argument the way he ended most arguments, by leaving. He needed the run. He needed the wind and the spray, and the mindless rhythm of 4 paws on wet rock, because the morning had been an unbroken catalogue of other people's problems, territorial disputes, supply chain negotiations, a complaint from the Ironmere elders about the new boundary markers on the East Ridge, and his wolf had been restless all day in a way that had nothing to do with any of it. Radek's wolf was the color of winter water, pale grey, shading to near white at his throat and chest, darker at the shoulders, his eyes a pale gold that seemed faintly luminous in the dark. He was massive, nearly twice the standard alpha build, and he moved with a precision that made other wolves nervous, as though every motion was considered, nothing wasted. 6 years ago, his wolf had gone still and quiet after something Radek did not speak about. And he had stayed that way, not calm, not settled, just absent from himself in some essential way, as though waiting for something he no longer believed would come. The blood hit him between one stride and the next. He stopped, rain hammering his back, wind pulling at his fur 50 yards from the cottage. His nose dropped to the split rock path where the blood had pooled in a hollow before the rain diluted it, and the scent reached through everything else, the storm, the sea salt, the rotting kelp, and seized him by the throat. Not just blood, a newborn. And beneath that, wound through it the way light moves through water, the specific unmistakable scent of someone who belonged to him. Warm cedar, rain on stone, ripe blackberries at the end of August, the ones that come apart on your fingers and stain everything they touch. His wolf did not surge. He had expected it to surge. Instead, something happened that had never happened in 31 years. His wolf went completely still. Not waiting, not coiling, simply still, the way a compass needle stops spinning when it finally finds north. Radek shifted before he reached the door. The cottage was dim, one dying candle, the smell of blood so concentrated it was almost a physical thing, and beneath it that scent again, cedar, stone rain, blackberry, so intense now that every nerve in his body was burning. She was on the floor. Dark hair matted with sweat and rain, her bare shoulders blue-white against the old floorboards, ribs showing clearly through pale skin. She had given her coat to the baby. She had been lying here long enough that the cold had gotten into her past, shivering, past the body's attempt to defend itself. Her lips were the color of old ash. There were thin white scars across her shoulder blades, old ones, measured, deliberate. The baby against her chest was moving. A small fist punched free of the coat, waving at nothing, and a reedy cry came with it that drove something primitive through Radek's chest, so hard it nearly knocked him sideways. He was across the room in 4 steps. She woke when he touched her face. Not smoothly. She came up from wherever she was like something breaking surface, gasping, and her eyes found him, and she pulled back against the wall with the baby clutched to her chest, and she bared her teeth. "Don't." Her voice was barely a sound. "Don't touch her." He stilled. He assessed her the way. He assessed everything, completely, quickly, without letting the assessment show in his face. She was dying. She was dying, and she was snarling at him. The baby in her arms had stopped crying the moment Morrigan pulled away, as though she could feel her mother's tension and was waiting with her. "I'm going to get you out of here," Radek said. "Don't touch my daughter." "I won't touch your daughter, but we are leaving this building because you are bleeding out and the storm isn't stopping, and I would like you to be alive in an hour." He paused. "My name is Radek. I'm Alpha King of Ironmere. You're on my territory." She stared at him. Her eyes were dark brown, nearly black in the candlelight, and they were the clearest, most awake eyes he had ever seen in someone who was otherwise shutting down. They moved over him with the precise attention of someone trained to evaluate documents, cataloging, sorting, filing. "I know who you are," she said, "and I can't be on your territory. I don't have a wolf. I'm not pack. I can't. You can cross any boundary on this continent, and it doesn't matter. What matters is that you are going to die if you stay here." He held her gaze. "I won't touch her without your permission, but I need you to let me carry both of you." She looked at the candle, at the broken shutter, at the storm beyond it, indifferent and enormous. She looked at her daughter. "Her name," Morrigan said. She was already losing the thread. He could see it in her eyes going glassy at the edges. "Her name is Corsa." She passed out before he reached the door. She woke on a table in a stone room that smelled like dried herbs and wood smoke, and the first thing she said was her daughter's name. "She's here," said a woman's voice, sharp and direct. "She's been fed and she's sleeping. Now stay still or I'll sedate you, and you won't like what I use." Morrigan turned her head. The healer was older, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped silver hair, and the kind of hands that made you immediately believe she knew what she was doing. She was bent over Morrigan's abdomen, with an expression of concentrated irritation. On the other side of the room, in a small padded box, a tiny face was visible above a white blanket, sleeping with the absolute commitment of the newly born. "Your wolf," the healer said, without looking up. "I don't have one." "You have one, it's there." She pressed 2 fingers against the inside of Morrigan's wrist and paused. Faint, very faint, like a signal coming through bad interference. She was quiet for a moment. "There's a binding on her, pack magic, layered, more than one casting. Someone reinforced it." She looked up. "How old were you when you stopped being able to shift?" Morrigan went very still. "I never shifted. It never happened." "It happened. You were starting to shift, and someone stopped it, and then they went back and made sure it stayed stopped. This isn't a natural absence. This was done to you." The healer's name was Bryn, and she said the rest of it without softening. Malnourishment, significant blood loss. The binding so old and layered it had calcified around Morrigan's wolf like scar tissue around a splinter. Whatever the power underneath was, it had been locked away so completely that it had stopped trying to get out. Radek sat at the side of the room during all of this. She noticed him the way you notice a fire, the peripheral warmth of it, the way the air changed in his direction. He did not speak. He did not crowd her. When Bryn finished and stepped back, he was the one who broke the silence. "Who bound your wolf?" he asked. "I don't know." "You have an idea." She did have an idea. She had spent 9 years in the Velthorn archives, and she knew what pack magic looked like in documentation. She had filed the binding records, what little the council chose to record. She had never connected them to herself because it had never occurred to her that she was something worth binding. "High Alpha Osram," she said of Velthorn. Radek went very quiet. The quality of the silence changed. "The same Osram who cast you out." "Yes." "Why?" She told him. She told him about the archive, about the falsified death record she had found 3 months ago while reorganizing 40-year-old council files. A record that placed a man named Aldevar Grain, the former Alpha King, alive for 6 weeks after his officially recorded death. About the secondary file she had found, tucked behind it, in Osram's own handwriting, detailing a treaty negotiation that would have sacrificed the western Velthorn settlements to secure the eastern border. About understanding, when she put it all together, that Osram had not discovered Grain's death. He had arranged it, that the Alpha King Osram, mourned publicly, every year had been murdered to stop a treaty that would have burned 200 pack members out of their homes. That Osram had then spent 30 years building those homes up from nothing, building Velthorn into one of the strongest packs on the continent, carrying his secret like a stone in his chest. That she had made the mistake of going to him with the files directly, thinking, what? That he would thank her? That he would come clean? He had looked at her across his desk with old, exhausted eyes, and 3 days later her name didn't exist anywhere in Velthorn's systems. Radek listened to all of it. When she finished, he said, "Corsa, just the name, after the sea channel." Morrigan blinked. It's a good name for something born in a storm. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, a consideration of one. He didn't crowd her. That was the thing she couldn't get past. She was familiar with the way dominant wolves moved through space, the way alphas collapsed the distance between themselves and anything they wanted, as though proximity was a form of claiming. Radek was the opposite. He kept careful distance, left food outside her door, asked before entering, asked before he held Corsa. He asked by standing in the doorway with his arms at his sides and waiting until she nodded. She always nodded. That was the part she couldn't explain. She, who had been touched without permission enough times that contact had become something she braced for, found herself nodding every time. She felt him, too, the thread between them, a warmth in her chest that pulsed faintly out of time with her own heartbeat, and she understood distantly what it was, even though she had spent her entire adult life telling herself it wasn't something that would happen to her. A wolfless records clerk did not find a fated mate. A woman with no pack and nowhere to go did not get claimed by an alpha king. On the 9th day, a woman walked into the library where Morrigan was sitting with Corsa asleep against her chest. She was tall, angular, with dark red hair pulled back from a face that was striking in the way a blade is striking, all clean lines and purpose. She sat down across from Morrigan without being invited, and her eyes moved over her with the particular assessment of someone who has already decided what they'll find. "I've been watching packs for 15 years, she said. Her name was Vessa, and Morrigan had heard the way the other wolves measured their words when they said it. "I've seen women come through a pack's gates with nothing and leave with everything. You've got the story. Tragic, alone, the baby. He's always had a soft spot for the ones who need saving." "I'm not asking for anything," Morrigan said. "You're living in the Alpha's West Wing. His healer put me there." Vessa leaned forward, and her scent shifted, something floral going sharp underneath, like jasmine burned too long. "He hasn't taken a mate in 6 years. Some of us have been here that entire time. We've bled for this pack. We've built what it is. And you stumbled onto his territory in a storm, and suddenly you're someone he visits 3 times a day." Morrigan looked at her, the rigid jaw, the white-knuckled grip on the table's edge, the faint tremor in her lower lip that she probably didn't know was there. She recognized it. She'd seen it in her own mirror on days when she was trying very hard not to feel something she couldn't afford. "I'm not trying to take anything from you," Morrigan said quietly. "I have no idea what I'm doing here. I have a 3-week-old daughter and nowhere to go and a wolf that someone locked away when I was a child. I am not your enemy." Something flickered across Vessa's face. "He'll put you aside eventually." "Maybe he will. The bond is just biology, it fades." "Then it fades." Morrigan shifted Corsa on her chest, feeling the small heartbeat against her sternum. "But right now she needs to eat and I need to sleep, and neither of those things has anything to do with you." Vessa left. It was Radek who told her on the 12th day, standing at his study window with his back to her. He had lost a mate 6 years ago, not lost, had been told she was dead. A border attack, her body never recovered, the pack who held the territory claiming they had buried her themselves. He had never fully believed it, and his wolf had never been still since. And after 6 years of a grief that didn't feel like grief because it never felt finished, he had stopped asking the question. He turned to face her when he said what came next. "I know your scent. I have known it since the moment I found you in that cottage, and it is the same scent my wolf has been looking for since the day he went quiet." He paused. "I'm not asking you to believe that. I'm not asking you for anything, but I need you to know it." She stared at him, at the controlled stillness of him, at the pale gold of his eyes in the afternoon light, at the way his hands, large, scarred, capable of visible damage, were pressed flat against his thighs with an effort she recognized as restraint. "I don't have a wolf," she said. "You have one." "She can't bond. She's been locked away so long, I don't know if she's there." He said it with a certainty that wasn't arrogance. It was something quieter. "I can feel her through the thread between us. She's there, and she's been getting louder every day. Morrigan pressed her hand to her chest. Underneath her palm, something shifted, not a spark. Something older, something that moved like deep water moving, slow and enormous, as though a creature that had been sleeping for a very long time had heard a sound it recognized and was beginning, for the first time in years, to lift its head. "I'm scared," she said. "I know. Not of you, of wanting something that gets taken away. That's my whole life, Radek. I learn not to want things, I become invisible, that's how I survive." He crossed the room, deliberately, each step its own decision. "Then let me show you this is different," he said. "Stay, not because of the bond. Stay because Corsa needs a roof and warmth, and I have those things, and I'm giving them without conditions. Stay today, let me ask again tomorrow. We'll do it one day at a time until you believe me, and if you never believe me, I'll have spent every day of my life trying. There are worse ways to live." She didn't say yes, she didn't say no. She looked at his hands. She looked at her daughter asleep in the bassinet 2 feet away, chest rising and falling in the unhurried rhythm of an infant who has been fed and is warm and has no concept of how unlikely that is. She didn't pull away. It was Sully who noticed her eyes. The beta, built like a retired offensive lineman, with a scar across his jaw and a permanent expression of mild exasperation that Morrigan had come to understand was actually a form of affection, caught the light off her irises in the courtyard on the 14th morning. He saw the thin ring of pale luminescence around the dark brown of her eyes, almost silver, almost there. His face did something complicated. He went to Radek. The Tidecaller bloodline. Bryn brought the book, old leather, the pages tissue-thin, and pointed to the illustration, a wolf with fur like running water and eyes that seemed to contain light rather than reflect it. An entirely female bloodline, the text said, thought extinct for 4 decades, capable of reaching into the bond network of any pack and reading every fracture, every severed connection, every thread that had been broken or distorted or corrupted, and mending them. Not a weapon, a restoration. The Council had destroyed them anyway, because a Tidecaller bonded to a dominant alpha was a power they couldn't predict or control, and that was enough. The binding on her, Bryn said quietly. Someone knew what she was. Someone bound her wolf to keep the Tidecaller gift dormant. Radek sat with that for a long time, long enough that Sully, who had known him for 11 years, recognized the specific quality of this silence and said nothing at all. When Radek finally spoke, his voice was very quiet. "Find out who told the Council where she is, because someone did." They came at 3 in the morning. Corsa's cry pulled Morrigan up from a dead sleep before she understood what it was. Not hunger, not discomfort, but the other cry, the one she'd heard exactly once before in the lighthouse cottage, the cry that was fear. She was on her feet before she was fully conscious. The window was wrong. The air in the room was wrong, charged and bitter, burning at the back of her throat with something chemical and artificially sharp. She grabbed Corsa and backed against the far wall, and they came through the window as she moved. 2 of them, then 3, fast and coordinated, with the green-lit eyes of wolves who had been chemically altered, stripped of hesitation, made into instruments. Council operatives. They fanned out with the precision of people who had done this many times in many rooms. Morrigan backed into the corner. The binding in her chest was a physical sensation now, not a flicker, not a pressure, but a scream, tight and hot against her ribs, her wolf throwing herself against it over and over with a desperation she could feel in her spine. The first operative reached for Corsa. Morrigan opened her mouth and screamed. It was not a human scream. She didn't understand what it was until it had already happened, until the air in the room vibrated with a frequency she felt in her teeth and her sternum and the back of her skull, a sound that was not entirely sound, a resonance that passed through stone and plaster and bone and reached into something beyond hearing. The binding shattered. She felt every thread of it go at once, old pack magic dissolving like ice in warm water, and what came up from beneath it was not rage or power or fire, it was knowing. She knew the room. She knew the wolves in it, felt the severed, distorted bonds inside each of them, like seeing knots in a rope, felt where the chemical alterations had fractured their connections to themselves and to each other, felt the tight wrongness of what had been done to them. She reached in and mended it. She didn't decide to. It happened the way breathing happens. The tide caller gift responding to damage, automatically, completely. The resonance moved through the operatives in waves, and each wave found a break and closed it. Their enhanced conditioning unraveled. Their wolves, suppressed and modified into instruments, surged back to the surface. All three of them dropped to their knees. Not attacking, not threatening, shaking. One of them looked up at Morrigan with eyes that were his own again, brown and human and shocked, and she saw in his face the specific relief of a person who has been very far from themselves and has just found their way back. Radek came through the wall. Literally, the door and a significant portion of the frame around it went with him, and he was already half-shifted, that pale grey crackling across his shoulders and arms, his eyes blazing gold. He stopped when he saw the room. He stopped when he saw Morrigan. She was standing in the corner with Corsair against her chest, and she was glowing, not dramatically, not like fire. A soft, steady luminescence at the edges of her skin and in the silver ring of her eyes that made the dark room feel less dark, the way a window makes a room feel larger even when it shows you nothing but night. Her wolf was awake. He felt her through the thread between them, felt the sheer scope of what she carried, ancient and deep and patient as tidal water. His wolf, who had not been still in 6 years, sank to his belly inside his mind and made a sound he had no word for. Radek. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. He said, "There are more coming. A full team." "I know." He was already calculating routes and assets and vulnerabilities with the automatic efficiency of a man who had spent his entire adult life being responsible for things he couldn't afford to lose. He took 2 steps toward her and stopped, because she was shaking now, the adrenaline dropping, Corsair whimpering against her chest. He held out his arms. She walked into them. He held them both, his mate and her daughter, and said nothing because there was nothing adequate to say. Sully appeared in the ruined doorway, took one look at the operatives still on their knees, and was already issuing orders before Radek had to speak. The full weight of what followed took 3 hours and involved a great deal of shouting that Morrigan heard from the medical wing where Bryn was examining her again with an expression suggesting she was reconsidering her life choices. The council team on the southern road had met Ironmere's full defensive deployment. 140 wolves, plus representatives from 2 allied packs who had arrived with suspicious speed, as though they had been warned and had been waiting. Someone had sent word ahead. Sully, Morrigan understood this 2 days later, and the understanding settled something in her that she hadn't known was unsettled. The council team withdrew. In the grey early morning, their commander said the extermination order stood. This was not finished. The council's position was unchanged. Radek, standing on the gate wall, said, "The Tidecaller is the bonded mate of the Alpha King of Ironmere and the mother of a child under my protection. Tell the council what she did to your wolves last night. Tell them she healed them. Tell them she freed their wolves from what was done to them, instinctively while protecting a newborn. Then ask the council whether that's what they wanted to destroy." The commander left. Vessa was found that afternoon with a packed bag and a council communication device. She hadn't bothered to hide particularly well. She stood in the center of the main hall, and she did not make excuses. She looked at Radek with the rigid dignity that is indistinguishable from terror if you know what to look for, and she said she had done what she believed was right for the pack. Radek said exile, not execution, for 15 years of service. He said it without anger, just the flat weight of a decision that had already been made. Morrigan said nothing. She looked at Vesa, and she thought about the tremor in her lip in the library, and the 15 years of work and discipline and hoping, and she thought, damage doesn't make you wrong about everything. Fear doesn't make you evil. It makes you dangerous. Those were different things. She would think about that for a long time. Osram came a week later. Alone, without enforcers, and he was older than Morrigan remembered. Thinner, slower, with the look of a man who has been carrying something heavy for so long it has become part of his silhouette. He sat across from Radek in the main hall, and he told the truth. Morrigan's mother had come to Velthorn 28 years ago, pregnant, dying, the last of the Tidecaller line. She had asked Osram to take the child, to hide her, to keep her safe and unknown in a world that had killed every Tidecaller it could find. Osram had said yes, and buried her mother in an unmarked grave, and given the child a desk in a basement office and a life of careful, deliberate invisibility. When she was 17 and the gift had started to wake up, he had bound it tighter. He had never told her any of it. He sat across from her now, and he did not ask for forgiveness. You failed her, Radek said, whatever you intended. I know it. Osram's voice was flat and old. What I did kept her alive. How I did it is something I'll carry a long time yet. Morrigan looked at him, at the weight behind his eyes, at the man who had made an impossible choice a long time ago and had never had the courage to make a better one, who had kept her hidden and kept her small, and watched her disappear slowly into her own erasure without intervening, because intervening was a risk, and she was too important to risk. She thought, there are so many ways to love someone that destroy them. She thought, understanding why doesn't mean accepting what. She did not forgive him that day, but she let him leave. The marking ceremony happened on the first clear night after the storm season ended, when the sea was flat, and the stars were out in force, and the air smelled, for the first time in weeks, like something other than incoming weather. Morrigan wore grey, a simple dress the color of winter water, and her dark hair was loose around her shoulders, and her eyes were ringed with silver that had stopped fading, that was simply part of her now. She looked nothing like someone who had given birth alone in a broken-down cottage 6 weeks ago, and everything like it, and both were fine. Corsa was held by Sully, who was doing his level best to look as though the situation was unremarkable and failing completely, since the baby had wrapped her entire fist around his smallest finger and appeared to have no intention of releasing it. The pack formed a circle in the courtyard, torchlight on old stone, the sea visible beyond the gate, flat and dark, catching stars. Radek stood in front of her. He was not in ceremony, black or formal armor. He was wearing exactly what he always wore, simple, dark, functional. Because he had told her he didn't want to perform this, he wanted it to mean something, and ceremony without truth was just theater. Morrigan, he said, and his voice carried to every corner of the courtyard, I claim you as my mate, my Luna, my equal, not by right, by choice, and by the grace of what you choose to give me. He tilted his head. The Alpha King of Ironmere, baring his throat to the woman who had been a wolfless records clerk in a basement office for 9 years. Morrigan stepped forward. She put her hand on his throat and felt his pulse against her palm. Fast, she noticed. He was nervous. This enormous, formidable, controlled man was nervous, and something in her chest softened around that knowledge the way water softens ground. She tilted her own head. He lowered his mouth to the curve of her neck and bit, and the mark burned bright and then sank deep, and the bond between them snapped into its final form. Not a thread now, a road, a current, something with depth and direction running between them, older than either of them, as permanent as the cliff she had nearly died on. She bit him back. His pulse jumped under her teeth. His wolf made a sound she felt in her own chest, low, reverent, the sound of something that has been running for a very long time and has finally stopped. Her Tidecaller gift rose with the bond, and she felt the courtyard, every wolf in it, every thread between them, every small fracture and old grief and quiet loyalty. She felt Sully's enormous warmth and Brynnin's brisk concern that was affection in disguise, and 200 wolves who had been waiting for their alpha to come home to himself, and had just watched it happen. She didn't mend anything. They didn't need mending. She just felt them. She let herself be felt. The sound that rose from the courtyard was not ceremony. It was not formal or rehearsed. It was the sound of a pack releasing something it had been holding for a long time. A collective exhale into cold night air that became, somewhere between the breath and the open sky, a howl. Months later, Corsa would be sitting on Morrigan's lap, on the seawall, watching the spring light move across the water, grabbing a fistful of her mother's hair with the impressive grip that Brynn had documented since her first hours of life. Morrigan would wince. She would untangle the small fingers. She would lift them to her lips. Radek's hand would settle on her shoulder from behind, warm and present, not gripping, just there. The way a lighthouse is there, not holding you, not directing you, just making the dark a little easier to read. She would lean back into him. Below them, in the meadow at the base of the cliff, pack pups would be chasing each other through new grass, tumbling and yelping and learning the size of their own bodies. Someone would be laughing, a full, uncomplicated sound carrying up the cliff face with the sea wind. The marks on their throats would catch the afternoon light, silver on warm skin. The bond between them would hum low and constant, like the sound the sea makes when you stop talking and start actually listening to it. Corsa would reach up and grab Radek's finger. He would let her keep it.